Welcome back, everyone. I want to show you something a little bit different today. This is a Sony MVC-FD91. This is the Sony Mavica digital camera, one of many models. This is a fairly well-equipped model from 1999. And these cameras were quite cool because rather than using expensive memory cards, they used floppy disks. You could store up to, on this particular model, which is an XGA or 1024 by 768 or 0.8 megapixel camera, you could store up to 13 images at XGA resolution on one floppy disk on standard quality mode, or you could up the quality to... Now, what I don't know is what the difference is technically between the two modes, but the higher quality mode will allow you to store up to 8 images on a single floppy. Now, I've taken a bunch of shots with this camera around the house, both in low quality and high quality mode, and I'm going to show those to you in just a few moments. That's why I've got the LTE 5280 out here. 5400, my bad. The LTE 5400 to demonstrate that. Again, in 1999, digital photography was still, it was not really taken seriously by professionals yet. But digital cameras like this one here made the images that you saw on the internet back in the late 90s possible. And while these cameras are somewhat expensive, I mean, the average person couldn't just run out and buy one of these things unless you had several $100s in the bank just to buy one. They were definitely more affordable than digital cameras of previous generations. And because they used standard floppy diskettes, that was a huge selling point because everybody had floppy disks hanging around, just piles, boxes of floppy disks just hanging around doing nothing. And every computer in 1999 had a floppy disk, except for the iMac. But you could still add a floppy disk, and because it's stored in standard JPEG and bitmap formats, these images could be read and opened by, they were platform agnostic. So if you had a Mac or you had a PC, you could open these image files and manipulate them with your image editing software of choice. The Mavica did come in a variety of models, and I'm not going to go over the differences between them and all the specs, but prior to the CD Mavica, which was released in 2001, which I have one of the first models, the floppy disk models were definitely they were something. They were. It was a quality camera, and just the fact that this sucker is 22 years old and fully functional, and produces magnificent image quality even to this day. It speaks volumes about the quality of consumer electronics back in the late 90s. The Mavica started out in 1981, believe it or not, as I can only describe it this way. It was like a Sony Handycam that, rather than recording a continuous feed of video on video cassette, it would produce or it would process a continuous video feed from its CCD device, and when you press the shutter button, it would capture that split second of video as a frame grab and store it on a proprietary magnetic disc that ended up becoming the video floppy disk, which, as far as I know, is the same technology used by the Canon Zap Shot, that's XAP shot cameras of the early 90s. Now, as most of my videos, this is not going to be, I'm not V Westlife, I'm not going to go and, we're not going to go through samples of images and discuss specs and everything. I don't really get into that level of detail in these videos because it's, well, I find it to be not as interesting. Not to knock anyone else's work, but if you really want to see some real, if you're really into specs and in specific details, I do suggest you check out V Westlife's channel. Anytime he gets an item like this, he'll study it to the ends of the earth. I don't do that. My videos are more how as a kid born in 1984, how this type of technology affected my life growing up at that time period, and my experiences with these types of devices. That's kind of what I do, kind of add a personal touch to this vintage technology. So let's picture this. 1999, I was in 9th grade. And at the time, you know, I could not afford a camera of my own. No way in hell. I didn't get my first digital camera until about 2001 or so. And the camera that I had that I could afford was a used HP PhotoSmart. I think it was a PhotoSmart. HP had released a line of digital cameras, and they weren't the best. It was a decent camera for what it was. 1.3 megapixel resolution, which is definitely lower, or I'm sorry, a little bit higher than what this thing would produce. But when I was in high school in 2000, I think it was about 2002, when I was in 12th grade, I had taken a class in graphic arts, and we were still using earlier model. I almost said CyberShot. We were using earlier Mavica models that did not have this large zoom lens and steady shot. So let's talk about this one for a minute. Now this particular camera, like I said, it was a fairly well-equipped model for its time. It features a flash, of course, but it also features steady shot. It's designed to, and this is, as far as I understand it, it's not a mechanical steady lens stabilizer like a lot of higher-end cameras would have. This is, as far as I understand it, it is entirely software-based. So what it'll do is it can sense movement, probably has some early form of gyro in there of some kind, or 3D accelerometer. I'm not really sure. I should look into that. But it can sense movement of the lens body or the camera body, and it compensates for it by shrinking the image down a wee bit. And that's how digital image stabilization usually works. So what it does is it throws away the outer, the outer band of the image, and it just throws it away, so it has a buffer, if you will, to move. But what's also interesting is this thing will shoot video with sound. But here's the caveat: you're limited by the 1.44 megabyte floppy disk size. So it's, I think it's 320 by 200 resolution, I believe. And you have a time limit of 5 seconds. Yeah, let that sink in for a sec. 5 seconds of video. That's all you have. Of course, YouTube didn't exist, and in 1999, 95% of internet users were still using dial-up at home. So you couldn't really send much video anyway. It has auto and manual focus, and there's a focusing ring right here. Now this does not manipulate the lens directly. It really just turns off the automatic focusing feature and allows you. It controls the motor that drives the lens. And like most Mavicas at the time, the lens is a pop-out lens, so it's not, it's not just a push button, turn it on and off. And this particular one, being a higher-end model for its time, it has a semi-articulating LCD display that can be flipped up for selfie mode long before the selfie term was ever coined. But even cooler than that, it still features a viewfinder. Now the viewfinder on this camera is basically a lot of this camera has a lot of the same guts and technology as the Handycam line of its day, and it has a small color LCD screen built into this viewfinder body. And you know, the funny thing is, when I got this camera, it didn't work. I tapped the side of the camera a few times and it started working, and it's worked ever since. I got this camera from an estate sale. It was priced at $5, but I bargained them down to $3, and I still think I paid too much. This camera is completely worthless, and it's really sad because it is a quality piece of equipment, and it does produce a decent image for what it is. Sadly, I did not receive a battery charger or a battery pack. Not that I'm worried about receiving a battery pack that's 22 years old, but I was able to buy this from eBay. This is a K-Star battery charger, and it came with a battery, and I paid a whopping $12 for it. Now, I'm going to little caveat, and this is my thoughts on these types of devices. These are basically fire hazards. There's no way that for $12 this is a quality piece of equipment. I really just bought it for the novelty. I wanted to see if the camera still worked. And here's the battery. It uses the InfoLithium, I forget the actual, so the InfoLithium batteries were usually denoted by a letter, just a single letter, M or N or what have you. This is, well, I believe it's the NP-F550/570 for Sony NP-550. So I don't know what the internal model designation is for this particular battery pack. I could find out, but I'm lazy. But this battery pack is what came with it. It claims 21 watt hours, 2,900 milliamps. That's what it claims. But for $12, probably going to last 6 months, maybe a week. One of the first things I did to this camera is I popped out the CMOS battery, or the little 3-volt lithium battery. It's a CR2025, which I stock. I stock these in my inventory at home, and so I was able to pop that in pretty quick. So it retains date and time settings. We'll turn it on and we'll kind of run through the menu and you'll see what it looks like. Now listen carefully to that startup chime for a sec. I'm going to run it again. Does that sound familiar to any of you? It does to me. It sounds like the Macintosh 2 startup chime. Really does. I just noticed something. Just noticed this. That in addition, see, they in the 90s, all right, the more buttons, the better the product. There's a lot of stuff you can do in this camera without drilling through menus, and that's the beauty of electronics with actual buttons rather than a giant freaking touch screen. I miss these days, really. I really do. For example, on the side of the screen, you have the brightness controls and the volume controls. I just... God, I miss buttons, don't you? So I can control the brightness of the screen. Right there. And the volume of the feedback. I think that's what it is. Or that could be the volume control for the MPEG video playback. That's more than likely, I think. We're going to need to put a floppy disk in there. Now, I'm going to use this one. Actually, one of these has images on it that I want to use for the demonstration side of this. So I'm going to just grab another floppy from my infinite pile of floppies. Actually, I have so many of them that I've been throwing them away. So I grabbed one from the trash can. Here's one. Here's a couple. I shouldn't throw these out. I should keep them because they're going to start getting hard to find. So let's take this one here. This is not write protected. We'll put a floppy disk in there. The great thing again about these floppy disks is that, let's say you're on vacation, you're at Disney World, you're at you're in Hawaii. Doesn't matter where you are. In 1999, wherever you are, floppy disks will follow. You could go anywhere and buy floppies back then. I remember buying floppy disks in a 3-pack in the grocery store. They used to sell them at Rite Aid or CVS or, of course, Walmart, Target, all the Kmart. You could buy floppy disks damn near anywhere, in addition to all of the usual suspects like Best Buy and Circuit City, CompUSA. So no matter where you are, you will not have a hard time finding floppies. And here's the other thing: is floppy disks were cheap. They only cost $1 a piece, maybe at the most, maybe a few cents for the cheap ones. So no matter where you are, you're never going to run out of space. You got to think about that. Granted, unlike a 35 millimeter camera, with a digital camera, you now have the ability to choose. So you could take a picture of something and say, you know what, I really don't like that, I'm going to retake it and delete the old one. So you haven't really wasted any space. In today's world, we've taken a different approach to photography. We have cell phones with cameras that are high resolution cameras, and we can take as many photos as we want. Literally as many photos and as much video as we want, depending on how much memory the phone, or usually it's a phone now, has. And even if you have a standalone digital camera, which some folks still use, especially professionals, they can buy memory cards that have seemingly unlimited amounts of storage, and they're not that expensive anymore. I mean, I just bought a 32 gigabyte memory card for my car. I think I paid $20 for it. So it might not seem like this makes sense in today's world because it doesn't. But back then it did. Memory cards were very expensive back in 1999. Back then we had mostly compact flash cards, and they were ridiculously expensive and very small. The average compact flash card back then might have been 4 megabytes, if that. So with a 1.44 megabyte floppy disk, the world is your oyster. So I put a floppy disk in there. It's not formatted, so we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to shut this light off so that you can see the screen a little bit better. And I'm also going to, let's take a look at this viewfinder here. I'm going to switch it over to the viewfinder. You get the full image, menu and all in the viewfinder. So it's, you probably can't see it very well on the camera, but it's there, I assure you. Oh, it just shut off. Oh, my battery's dead. I think my battery's dead. Or no, it just timed out. The battery's not dead. I've got a full battery there. So we're running on the $12 K-Star battery. All right, so let's go ahead and go into the menu. Now, one thing I don't like about this camera is this thing is ridiculously heavy. It has an entire floppy disk mechanism built into it. But using this little menu, I guess you'd call this a D-pad, it's a bit awkward, a bit touchy. So we're going to go over to Disk Tool. See if I can show you that. And then we're going to do a format. Format OK. So it's done formatting. Notice how fast it formats the disk. It's not doing a full format like a typical PC or Mac would do. All it's really doing is wiping off the disk header, and that's it. And you're just overwriting. So it's a quick format. But the other thing is, I believe this drive runs at a faster speed than typical floppy drives. So that's kind of nice. It's very quick. Now, I've done a few tests with this. I did one photo at full or high how do I say this? At high quality mode. I took one photo as a bitmap, because it does bitmaps and JPEGs. I was able to store only one high quality bitmap at 1024 by 768 on one floppy disk. I had to do a bitmap because I don't have anything to read JPEGs installed on my Tandy over there, the Tandy 486 running Windows 3.1, but it can read bitmaps. So I did a bitmap. And so let's take a look at some of the other settings that we have here. So I have, the program button, which allows me to change the f-stop. Okay. It has night mode. Looks like that's it. So you have night mode, normal mode, and that's it. So this doesn't have a lot of the like motion, high speed. It doesn't have a lot of those features that later model cameras had, and a lot of video cameras at the time, apparently. I thought it would. That's AE. Yeah, it doesn't have that. So it has night mode. You can see the little crescent moon icon. See it? White balance adjustment. So I think that's sunlight, indoor light, nothing. So we'll take the, let's see here. That must be macro. I should read the manual on this. A lot of these icons were not used in later Sony products. I find that interesting. Yeah, there's your white balance adjustment. The zoom control is up here. And this has a 14, let me just zoom in here. This has a 14x optical zoom. Which in 1999 was incredible for a digital camera to have that, because a lot of them either had fixed zoom and no, some even didn't even have digital zoom, but fixed zoom was all the rage because it was low cost and easy to make. But the other thing is 14x is a pretty decent zoom lens, really, even for today's world, I think. Because I know that most of the earlier cameras that I bought back in the day only had up to 3x optical zoom. So having a 14x optical zoom with steady shot, that was pretty cool. And let me see if I can demonstrate the steady shot. I'm sorry, this is a little awkward to film, but I'm going to zoom into the basement, other side of the basement here. So we have steady shot turned on. Auto zoom. Now I'm going to turn steady shot off. See, it's a little bit shakier. Just a subtle movement of, it can see my heartbeat, basically. Turn it on, and it stabilizes the image. Now, my suspicion was that it throws away the outer couple of pixels of the image. So one way to tell is if I get it focused on something here. You zoom it down, zoom it out here. Let's see if the image changes size. All right, so we have stabilization off. Look at it carefully. Let's turn it on. No, I see no difference. So my suspicions were incorrect on that. All right. So we formatted a disk. We've gone through some of the menu settings. Of course, right on the home screen here, you have the controls for timer and plus or minus EV. Right on the home screen. Here's your flash control. Now, this model does not have a solenoid that pops the flash open, so you have to do that manually. I wonder if it has a red eye reduction. Let's see. If I press the flash button, no, it does not. There's no red eye reduction on this camera. I guess you just don't need it. Flash on or off, that's it. You can also hit the display button. It turns off the menu. So if you just want to focus on what your subject is, you can do that. Like I said, these digital cameras or digital photography hadn't reached a point where it was a replacement for 35mm. So more often than not, a professional photographer back in those days would still have their 35mm kit. It wasn't until around the mid-2000s, I think, when digital really replaced 35, and now really only a few, boutique artists, I think, or photographers are shooting on 35. The thing about 35mm film is that it has an infinite resolution. It really does. Almost infinite. There are no pixels on 35mm film. So there's not a fixed number of pixels across the image to count. And you're really limited by... The bad thing about 35 that digital gave us is instant feedback. You know, what you see on this screen is what you get. You didn't have to wait an hour to develop the film to see what it looks like. So why don't we go ahead and fire up this compact over here, and we'll take a look at some photos that I took, and I'll tell you what modes I used, and we'll see what that looks like. But it doesn't have a lot of useless menus and functions. So let me talk about what replaced these. So by the time I think it was around 2001 rolled around, Sony had released the CD Mavica, which effectively replaced the floppy disk models. But there was a transitional period where Sony had already released the CyberShot line as the little brother to the Mavica, the lower cost version, which depended on proprietary memory sticks. And some of the later versions of the Mavica floppy actually had memory stick slots. Now, when I was working in Office Depot in 2004, we actually still had some of these left over. And they were left over from about a year or two prior. And they featured floppy disk drives as well as memory stick ports. And the CD Mavica still hung around for a couple of years because you could store I don't know how many images on a CD, on a compact disc. They were actually 3-inch discs. I have one right over here. We'll take a look at that for a sec. This is a CD Mavica, and this has a rewritable disc inside it here. Pocket CDRW. I have a bunch of these for this camera. And it has a little mini 3-inch CD drive. These are good for 210 megabytes. Now, we're talking, this was made at a time when the memory sticks, I believe, were around 64 megabytes or less. And this was before the memory stick duos. This came out in 2001. I thought for sure that this camera had a memory stick slot in it, but I was wrong. I really thought it did. This particular camera is rated for just 2.1 megapixels, which is 1600 by 1200. 6x digital zoom. I don't know what the optical zoom rating is on this one. I'll have to look that up. But I believe it has optical zoom. It should. 3x optical on this one. 3x optical. This camera still works. Actually, this is one of my favorite cameras. I got this a couple of years ago. We were throwing it out at work, and I'm like, I can't let this go in the trash. Come on. And I took a couple of shots with this camera, and the quality is amazing. Yes, it's not high resolution. It's not, 2.1 megapixel is really not a lot. But the quality of the image, the color depth, and the clarity is amazing with these cameras. Sony really did use decent optics, and their sensors were just amazing. In fact, I liked Sony cameras so much that my very first digital camera that I went out and saved up for was a Sony CyberShot. It was a CyberShot DSC P31, I believe. And that was my first, I would call my first real digital camera. It had a fixed zoom, so no zoom lens, 1.3 megapixels if I recall. And I love that camera. I used it for about 2 or 3 years before I bought a new one. And the new one was a DSC P71 or 72, which I still have, which still works. I use it at work. Up until a couple of years ago, I was using it to take photos of various things for different projects, and it's a damn good camera. So let's see what the P91 can do. And I I got that right. FD91, I'm sorry. Let's see what the FD91 can do. So we've got our compact over here. One of these discs has images on it. Let's take a look. Unfortunately, I can't open these images with Windows Image View or Microsoft Image or Photo Editor, Photo Viewer, whatever the hell it is. It won't open them. But I can use Photoshop. So let's do that. This is running Windows 95. I have Photoshop 5.5 installed in this guy right here. And there we go. I'll zoom in so we can see a little better. There we go. Remember the days when the license code was on the splash screen? Those are good times. It was a different time back then. The honor system. The honor system. Alright. But you can go out and buy one of these cameras. Now they're great. I like these older Mavicas with the floppies because they're amazing for for using for adding digital images to vintage computer projects. Let's say I want a custom background image. I can do that with this machine or with this camera. I can just throw the image on a floppy disk and transport it right over to my old compact or my old Tandy or whatever the case may be, whatever I have for a system that I'm working on that particular time. In fact, you'll find that a lot of early desktop background images were actually taken with cameras like this Mavica. Let's turn that light off so we reduce some glare. Get a better shot of this. So this is a photo I took of of where I'm sitting right now. I took this on at night in standard quality, low quality. So let's fit it on screen. This is kind of blowing it up a little bit. It's a little bit grainy. You can see there's a lot of graininess in the darker spots. And it's not really showing up well on the camera, but that's all right. I'll describe it to you. But overall, the image doesn't look terrible. It doesn't look great, but it doesn't look terrible. And we're dealing with a low light situation as well. So let's try another one. The nice thing about these old floppy cameras, and even the CD cameras, is that this is with a little bit of light. I turned some light. No, this is with the flash on. I'm having a hard time zooming this in. Let's do actual pixels. There we go. You can scroll it up, down. Now this is with this is in low res or low quality, XGA resolution, and you can see, pretty clearly that the image. If we're gonna nitpick, yeah, it sucks. But if we appreciate it in its context and for what it was intended to be used for, which is basically producing images for the web in the days of dial-up, it's not a bad little camera. Opening these up at random. I don't know what these images are. I can't preview them. Here's the kitchen. Pretty dark image. Again, you can see a lot of graininess to the image. It says actual pixels. So you can actually see it shows up on camera. You can see that there's a lot of graininess, especially on this wall. So these images kind of suck. So why don't we see what you can really do? We'll take this disc out. Put in the other disc, which has the better quality images. I think it's this one. Let's see what we got. Nope, not this one. Let's try this one. Here we go. Nothing on that one either. can't be. I'm pretty sure I didn't erase that disc, but okay. No, that's empty. So is the other one. Well, that's kind of sucky. Is it this one? Oh, you know what? I think I did erase the disc. No, that was dumb. Maybe I'll have to go take some more photos. Now this is one that I took. This is a bitmap that I took at full res. I'm sorry, full quality, full res. That's 1024. So let's see. Now the bitmap, of course, is an uncompressed image format. In fact, even to this day, bitmaps are pretty decent quality. I tried to open this on the Windows 3.1 machine, and it took forever, and the graphics card doesn't have enough color support to view this. Now this is, again, this is a bitmap at full high quality. This is Oreo. Let's take some better images. Let me go take a couple. Okay, fine quality mode. Okay, right off the bat, we've got a nice photo of a, I believe those are real flowers. The girlfriend put them there, so there they are. So I transferred the images on 2 floppy disks to my Mac, which is running Big Sur. So, newsflash, Big Sur will still read your DOS formatted floppy diskettes. Hurrah. I'm pretty impressed with the color depth, the color accuracy, actually, is what I meant to say. The detail, when you shrink the images down, I'm actually using iMovie right now. As I'm narrating this, I'm looking at the images and kind of picking out some of whatever stands out to me. But they look amazing in the smaller preview screen of iMovie. But as I upload this video, that may change, and you start seeing them in a much bigger size on your screen. But that tomato, by the way, is not bright red. It is, in fact, that color. So the accuracy of the color is pretty spot on. These are not professional images. I'm not a photographer, but you get the idea. This is in bright sunlight. You can see those. Yeah, I'm actually pretty impressed with what this camera can do, given its age. It's 21 years old. It's old enough to drink. And yet it still shoots amazing photos in the context of the technology for its time. That's important to note. Have a great day, everyone, and keep on shooting.